Manatee. So I'm excited to get to speak with y'all today.
Great. Take it away, Martha.
All right. And I first met Zander last summer. I'd heard him speak at a rally in Sarasota. Then I went to attended a Democratic Women's Club meeting in Sarasota, not realizing that necessarily that he was also going to be speaking again. And yeah, that was a time when I just felt like I needed to do more. So, a little bit about Zander and Sea Alliance. The organization that is now Sea Alliance began while Zander was still a student at Pineview High School. He's given two famous speeches, probably some infamous ones as well, but his two famous speeches were the graduation speech, in which he used his curly hair as a metaphor for his queerness, and then his address to Bridget Ziegler, who, as we all know, is a founder of Moms for Liberty. He was also a primary plaintiff in the Don't Say Gay lawsuit against Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida, which was victoriously settled in 2024. Zander and C's activism have reached over 1 billion people in 101 countries. In response to C's explosive growth, Zander has taken a leave from Harvard to return to Sarasota and lead Sea Alliance in organizing community actions, registering youth voters, and in opening the Sea Space in Sarasota. I think it was maybe initially a 1 or 2 year leave of absence that has now been extended. His activism has been written about in Washington Post, Rolling Stone, Teen Vogue, The Hill, Politico, Vice, Independent, USA Today, a number of others. He also gives commentary repeatedly on Good Morning America, CNN, and MSNBC. I saw him being interviewed, I think it was yesterday morning, on our ABC News 7. Zander and Sea Alliance members are familiar faces in Tallahassee during committee meetings and during sessions speaking on issues that impact education in Florida. So when I first saw Zander, heard him speak at this Democratic Women's Club, um, it was the data-driven approach to organizing, the pulling people in at, if you will, the bottom of the ballot, where our voices do make a visible difference. And then, having them vote up ballot from there. It's just Zander's brilliance and enthusiasm is just incredible. So I continue to be informed, challenged, and inspired, not only by Zander himself, but honestly by all of the youth organizers around the country who join the weekly Zoom with Zander and other weekly Zoom workshops. So many of the things that C has done for me has, the education, the things that I have learned about. And then just to be so inspired by these, high school and college student organizers in particular, and again, all over the country. So all that said, please please join me in welcoming Zander Moricz.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you all very much. I have some presentation slides that I'm going to share. If throughout the presentation you're like, we already know this, move on, or you're like, I have questions, please talk more about this, just interrupt me or drop it in chat. I'll make note right here, and I'm happy to make this an open conversation as we go. As Martha named, I've been really blessed to be able to work with her over the last year. I see Martha 3 to 4 times a week over our laptops, and what we've been able to start building and the way that our movement has grown and the way that you've grown, I've grown, our relationship has grown, and this movement has grown is really exciting. And it's why I'm really interested in thinking about how we can work more closely with League of Women Voters in Manatee County. So I want to plant that seed with y'all as I'm having the conversation today. The energy that folks that have done this work for years get from our young people is amazing, but the experience, the support, the stability that our young people get from people who have done the work for years is equally rewarding. And it's that multi-generational partnership that has allowed us to break records and win elections in the state of Florida. So at that, I'm going to dive into today's presentation. Give me 1 second to pull it up and make sure that it's presenting correctly. Can everyone see the slide and hear me clearly? All right, fantastic. Again, as I'm going, feel free to interrupt me. You cannot offend me. You can only help me be helpful. Let's dive. Sea Alliance is one of the largest youth-led civic movements in the country. Sea Alliance was founded in 2019 as a club at Pineview School, which, as many of you may know, is in Sarasota County, y'all's next door neighbor. And from 2019 to now in 2026, we've grown from 12 friends to over 2,000 organizers, aged 12 to 93. We are a youth-led, multi-generational organizing force that's building school board-centered movements and campaigns that create short-term protections and long-term power for the people that we serve. What do I mean by short-term protections, long-term power? I mean that we are being honest and realistic about how we can actually structurally change the outcomes and the realities that we're experiencing, while also not leaving communities behind as we're pursuing those larger goals. So for example, we've been building towards the 2026 midterms since January of 2025, but every week along the way, we're putting out resources, we're doing mutual aid, we're listening to community members, and we're getting engaged as we need to, while also naming that if we don't structurally get involved in turning out new voters and in changing the electorate in Florida, we are always going to be reacting to the problem, we are always going to be one step behind, and we're always going to be playing catch up, which is not a position we like to be in. So it's a position we're working to get out of. In just 2 years, we've activated youth organizers in all 67 counties across Florida, reaching every single school district in the state. We are not one state. We are actually 3 states wearing a trench coat, and Florida is a really challenging state to organize because of that. We are massive. We are also the most diverse youth voter population out of all 50 states in the country. That means that the way that we organize has to be hyper-local, and it has to be led by the people whose lived experiences reflect the communities, the neighborhoods, and the problems that are being organized. That is how we've led the work, and that is what allowed us to be the first and only youth-led network in the state to have an active organizer in every single school district. From high school walkouts to full-scale election strategies, we've organized thousands of students, informed millions of voters, and held elected officials accountable. We've shifted school board dynamics in some of the most politically hostile counties in Florida, like Sarasota, while remaining nonpartisan always, grassroots always, and coalition-centered always. I want to name that in every county that we've organized in thus far, League of Women Voters chapters have been a partner to us and have extended the ability for us to do work in a way that is perceived as legitimate, grounded, and sustainable, because the reputation League of Women Voters has and the work that y'all do is unquestionably one of the most important civic forces in the country. Sea Alliance, our story, as Martha gave you a little bit of the trajectory of, is laid out here. We founded as a club in 2019 at Pineview School, and then 4 months after Sea Alliance was founded, what came? COVID-19. And so right away, we were forced with the question of either we disband or we figure out how to do this without a campus. And that was a pretty big question for us because we were a campus-based club. And I decided if we were experiencing this problem, a ton of other clubs and a ton of other schools were experiencing the exact same problem. So what if we could become the solution to that problem? During COVID-19, we did a statewide lecture circuit where we reached out to community centers, high school clubs, activist groups, and organizations like League of Women Voters. And we said, hey, we know that your entire program has just been crushed and you now need to find a way to engage people and entertain them on Zoom. We would love to come do a presentation, talk about issues at your school board, and talk about how students can get involved in shaping the response and the solution. We were able to do a presentation in all 67 counties in the state, and we began to grow very quickly into the largest youth-led organization in the state of Florida by 2022. In 2022, we decided to unite all of our campaigns. At the time, it was fully distributed. Broward was organizing Broward, Sarasota was organizing Sarasota, Orlando was organizing Orlando, and all of the campaigns looked different. Some people were organizing around reproductive justice, some people were organizing around climate change, some people were focused on voter registration purely. In 2022, we decided to unite and focus on the Don't Say Gay bill. Why? Because we had become established as the Social Equity Through Education Alliance, and this bill, cleanly, clearly, and immediately, attempted to destroy social equity throughout education. We came together and we organized the Say Gay walkouts, of which I hope you have seen, and we organized a variety of campaigns that educated communities, redefined the narrative from a parental rights and education bill to the Don't Say Gay bill, and worked with organizations like Equality Florida on the Don't Say Gay lawsuit. We also had a lot of very high profile media moments like my graduation speech, and also things like the Say Gay sticker campaign, which ended up being one of our largest and most successful campaigns to date. In 2 months, we were able to activate 40,000 high school students in a direct action where they, across their graduation stages, wore Say Gay stickers to show that while we can't say gay, we can always say gay. And while we're leaving our high schools, we're not leaving our high schools behind. In developing this message, we were actually able to build bipartisan, multi-generational support for LGBTQ plus representation in our public schools. It was because of this public support that we were able to generate all of the incredible judicial support and the legal support that ended up allowing us to deliver the victory we did in 2024, which reversed all of the major changes of the Don't Say Gay bill. That was also pushed forward by 2023, which was our biggest single action year to date. In 2023, we organized Walk Out to Learn, which had 302 college and high school walkouts occur on April 21st, all in the state of Florida. This is still to this date the largest student-led protest and in Florida's history. And we were able to generate over 150 new fellows and organizers from this single day of action. And we were also able to register hundreds of students for a virtual African American history course, because at the time, AP African American history had just been taken away from our high school students. So I walk us through these campaigns as I'm approaching 2024 to show that we're both thinking long-term. How do we build capacity, community, and power with young people while responding to the moment that matters to them? After 2023, after we organized that largest student-led protest in Florida's history, it became clear that we had the opportunity, we had the scope, we had the scale, but we needed a single direction and trajectory to start to channel all of this energy, all of this opportunity to. So we started to work with Social Sphere and Target Smart, which are two amazing data firms rooted in national politics that have helped us build an understanding of what's going on in Florida. We actually worked to do the very first youth voter data landscape project that's been done in Florida in about 2 decades. And just the simple fact that it hasn't happened in 2 decades gave us some insight as to why the young people of Florida are such a challenging group to understand and to engage with electorally. What we found won't surprise you, which is that Florida's young people are the most disenfranchised youth voter population out of all 50 states in the country. Out of all 50 states, a young person in Florida is less likely to vote compared to any other population of young people. It's stunning. And the reason is almost singular. It was the same for Democrats who didn't turn out. It was the same for NPAs who didn't turn out. And it was the same for Republicans who didn't turn out. What we found is that increasingly, young Floridians are also educated and empathetic about what's happening. With our cell phones and with the access to the internet, we actually found that young Floridians were more politically aware than the generation before them, but they believed significantly less than the generation before them that they could make a difference in the political process. So we started to ask why that was. And the answer was incredibly simple. If you are a young woman, if you are a young Black or brown person, if you are a young queer or trans person in the state of Florida, and the only political inspiration you have to look to is Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Ron DeSantis, you're not spoken to in the politic. Even though Joe Biden offered release in the greater chaos or relief in the greater chaos, he's still not inspiring to a young voter who's trying to find out where they belong in the politic. And so what we found is that young people in Florida understood the issues. They knew that they mattered, but they didn't believe that their vote mattered. And they didn't believe that speaking out mattered. And we found that that was compounded by everything that was being told to them on social media and in traditional media. If you looked at the 2024 elections, what was in the headlines, what was on Instagram, what was on Facebook, what was on Twitter was horrible. It did not say, wow, here we go, a Florida governor's race. Let's see what happens. In January of 2024, it said, we're expecting a red wave wipeout. The governor's race is already decided. Maybe he's going to break the record for how much we've won by. So when we haven't had a Democrat elected in the state of Florida for 20 years, or an independent candidate elected in 20 years, when we've only had Republican voters elected for 20 years, if young people don't immediately identify with a candidate or with a political party that speaks to that, they're not excited about getting involved. So we even saw that Republicans assumed that the vote decision was over and they decided not to get involved. So at a total level, we were seeing that young Floridians thought that our elections were decided, that our politic was hard set, and that their involvement couldn't make a difference. When we looked to the track record of governor's races, it became really clear that there was so much money there and so much legacied voting decision that it was going to be really hard for Sea Lions to get involved and disrupt that quickly. And what we learned is that to get young people involved, they need to see evidence of what they're doing working. So we tested some new solutions. We tried a couple concepts and we found one that worked. That concept, that idea, that solution is the school board strategy. We exercised that as a case study in 2024 here in Sarasota County, and it worked. Now we've been building it for the last 2 years, and it's everything we're building towards in the 2026 midterms. That is what I'm going to talk to you about today, and that is why we believe and we know we have a lot of victories to look forward to in 2026. So this is a quick look at the Say Gay campaign. This happened in 2022. This was Don't Say Gay walkouts, the Say Gay plaintiffs, the Say Gay campaign. This was Walk Out to Learn, our largest single direct day of action. This is Students Before Politics. This is what I wanted to talk more with you about right now. In 2024, we organized the largest youth voter turnout campaign in Sarasota County's political history. We turned out more young voters than have ever been turned out by any organization or political party in Sarasota County before, and it was all rooted around the school board. We intend to do that not only in Sarasota again this year, but in Manatee County, in Hillsborough County, in Pinellas County, in Orange County, in Brevard County, in Polk County, and in Seminole County. We have selected school districts that we know need and can see an increase in young voter turnout that will allow a school board to better put students before politics. We're not interested in partisan politics. We're not interested in telling people to only vote for one candidate or one party. We want to make sure that our communities are engaged in what's happening in their school boards, have information about how to get involved and take action, and have education around the election, the options, and the community context. What we find is that if we do that work, in 80% of the cases, families put students before politics on the ballot, at the school board meetings, and in their community. That's why when we ran the Students Before Politics campaign in 2024 in Sarasota County, we turned out with the exact same nonpartisan messaging, thousands of Democratic voters, but also thousands of independent voters and thousands of Republican voters, all for the same candidates who put students before politics. We didn't tell them who to vote for. We didn't demand their vote in a certain candidate-centered context. We gave them information about the horrible things the school board was doing and the opportunities they had to change it, and voters made informed decisions. That is what we're replicating. That is what we've proven works. And we've actually partnered with data teams to be able to see the specific voters that we speak to and how they turn out to vote. So this isn't a guess. This isn't a wonderful correlation. We've been able to prove causation from our specific messaging to voters turning out in ways that they've never turned out before. Let's look at it. Let's get into it. This is No on One. I'm not going to speak too much about this today, but we should know that in November of 2024, Sea Alliance had over 260,000 voter conversations in just 3 weeks in an effort to ensure that Florida's voters said no to Amendment 1, which would have turned Florida school board elections into mandatorily partisan elections, which would, as we know, cut 1/3 of voters from the voter roll. We were able to prevent that from happening. Florida voters said no on 1 because it was good for no 1, and all of our elections remain nonpartisan. Tallahassee Our Power is the final thing I'm going to blast through to talk about our school board strategy. And that's something that Martha referenced a little bit earlier in the introduction. But every legislative session since 2022, Sea Alliance has been engaged in making sure that young people and community members of all ages have the opportunity to speak directly with their lawmakers to committee meetings and as a part of the legislative process. We understand deeply and sincerely that the majority of the Florida legislature is not excited to hear about diverse perspectives, particularly from young people. So what we're interested in doing is building a feedback loop. What we do is we bring information, data, opinions, and insights from our communities to Tallahassee and share them directly with lawmakers. We've had, over the last 3 months, over 40 lawmaker conversations directly with students and their constituents so that we can inform them about what's happening in their communities. We then, through mailers, mass texts, phone calls, door knocks, television ads, and digital ads, inform the communities about what their lawmakers are doing, and we have them reach back out to their lawmakers and let them know how they feel. What we find is that the majority of Floridians, even Floridians who vote, even Floridians who are educated, have no idea what our state legislature is doing at any given point in time. And that's obviously by design. And so what we work to do is reconnect people with their lawmakers so that they're able to hold them accountable. What this looks like is a group that you can see right here on the page. We met with lawmakers and we told them how we felt about Schools of Hope. We then took a recording of what they said they were going to do with Schools of Hope and let their community members know about it. What that caused was hundreds of emails and phone calls and texts and mail going back and forth between lawmakers and constituents and between Sea Alliance informing them that continue to create a conversation about the legislation. This elevates and escalates our power, and more importantly, we hold it accountable through the election. So obviously, our lawmakers did not take good action on Schools of Hope this year, and they certainly didn't take good action on vouchers. So what we're going to be doing is messaging, informing, and putting ads out to all of the constituencies, and we geographically target this about what their lawmakers did in regards to these education pieces, and we're going to point them towards the upcoming elections so that they're encouraged to vote, and they're encouraged to vote while remembering the impact that their lawmakers have had on their lives. We find that this very simple connection increases voter turnout and increases the ability for people to make informed choices when they're turning out to vote. The emotions that people are feeling right now about the many harms done during our legislative session, they're not going to last to August. It's up to us to make the connection and show people that the pain they're experiencing now, well, if they want to have a deep impact on legislative session, it doesn't start during legislative session. It starts in election season when we choose the people that we're sending to the legislature to represent us. And so that is the final program that I want to discuss here as we head into the Sea Alliance strategy, the school board strategy that allowed us to have game-changing results in 2024, and that will allow us to have game-changing results in 2026 with our campaign, Midterms on Our Terms. You'll notice what I've just broken down. Each of our programs, each of our movements, each of our campaigns has a distinct theme and branding. That is because we move in a full coalition-centered mindset, and we build year-long or multi-year campaigns, movements, and programs that allow for many organizations to take on different components of the work so we all go farther together. Every single piece of work that we have done since 2022 has been coalition-driven, and it has made us a more flexible, dynamic, and powerful organizing force. Midterms on Our Terms is a data-driven national movement that is organizing school boards as a solution to protect democracy at every level of government. I'm going to dive in. Let's do it. This is our theory of change that we call the high five. These are 5 principled reasons why school board organizing delivered us the results that it did in 2024, and this is why it'll deliver the results that it will in 2026 over and over and over again. This is how we're going to turn out and win voters in 2026, and this is the strategy through which we build power. The first reason that school board organizing is such an essential part of our strategy is that the impact is immediate. School board elections are one of the biggest missed opportunities in American politics. They often have under 10% turnout, yet school boards decide what students learn, how schools are run, and how safe our classrooms will be, which all link directly to the future viability of our country's democracy and economy. Just a few dozen people showing up, just a few hundred voters turning out can change everything. Most people don't know who's on their school board or what their school boards actually do. Elections have low turnout, low participation, and low public awareness. That means fewer voters, fewer dollars spent, and less time needed to make a real difference. There's just a few hundred voters who can decide what students learn and how schools are run, and we take advantage of that fact. So what this looks like is the fact that last Tuesday, we had school board meetings across the state. At almost every single one, Sea Alliance organizers and student fellows were quoted in their local papers, and in every single one, we pushed their message out on social media, which garnered new responses from community members. Because of that, because our message hits and impacts very quickly, our young people become more encouraged because they see their investment has a return. They see that when they go to a school board meeting and give public comment, community members come up to them afterward and say, good job. They see their public comment do the distance on social media. They see it get quoted in the press. That doesn't happen when we try to advocate to the national legislature. It doesn't happen when we tweet on social media about the presidential election, because our school boards are such localized centers, and because anytime a student speaks at a school board, people's ears perk up and they really focus. Our students get affirmed and they see the impact of their work more quickly. In Florida, where the number one problem is voter disenfranchisement, where the number one problem is people not believing that their vote makes a difference or their voice makes a difference, the best thing we can do is show them evidence of their voice making a difference or their vote making a difference. So by having them go to school board meetings or protest around school boards or speak out around school board policies, what we see is that very quickly we're able to create resonance around their message. They're able to see their impact and they want to stay involved through the election because of it. So school board organizing doesn't start just around the election. It starts around specific issues that matter to our communities, matter to our students, and get them to get involved. There are some school board elections where if just the marching band at one high school turned out to vote, the entire school board could be flipped. There were several hundred, that's not just a figure of speech. There were several hundred school board elections in 2024 decided by less than 100 votes. Our young people get excited. They get hungry. They get active when they see that at a much lower threshold than the presidential or the gubernatorial or the congressional, that they can make a dramatic difference in our school board elections. And that evidence starts meeting by meeting, week by week. Think about that when you see here in Sarasota. How many of you saw anything from our January school board meeting and rallies where we broke the attendance record and had 150 students give public comment about the ICE resolution that Bridget Ziegler put forward? I'm seeing one nod and I'm going to take it. We broke the attendance record there, and that was covered in national media. It was covered in over 20 states, and impressions that went out from social media ended up garnering over 1 million total impressions from one local Sarasota County school board meeting. That's so exciting for our young people. It speaks in their language, and now all of those students were excited about what they were going to say at the February school board meeting. Could we push the record further? Could we give better comments? Could we go farther on social media? Could we talk to those same reporters again? It's making the politics real. What we also have to understand is that this is a different medium than talking at the hospital board or the county commission, right? We're not asking our young people to speak about insurance premiums, which might be uncomfortable. We're not asking them to speak about policies they don't understand or haven't experienced. We're asking them to speak about their daily lives every single day. And because of that, they're comfortable and they watch it shift quickly. So the first reason the school board strategy has been so incredibly viable for us is that the impact is immediate. The second big reason is that they bring people together and they bring out the best. What do we mean by that? Over 80% of voters, not parents, all voters across the entirety of the political spectrum, including far-right extremist MAGA Republican voters, have said that they want to see increased investments into public education and they want to remove politics from our classrooms. And they're not even thinking about that in the hateful ways that you might name. They do not want electoral politics dominating the conversation around our children. So how do we have things like the voucher program and schools of hope and book bans and don't say gay bills dominating the conversation? We have things like Project 2025 and billionaires driving the conversation from a top-down approach. It becomes incredibly easy for us to disrupt that when we go grassroots up. What we find is that in communities like Sarasota, where it's very deep red, we are still able to generate a bipartisan conversation, Democrats, Republicans, and non-party affiliated voters, around similar shared values. I name the Republican part specifically because often, even though we are a nonpartisan program, because we do things like support LGBTQ plus students and support our immigrant students, people perceive us as being, oh my gosh, they're all the way radical left. But what we do is we break apart that conversation, we center it on shared values and student need. And what we find is that allows us to bring out a huge portion of our community that on other issues would get stuck. But because we're socializing, organizing, speaking, and moving around a shared value at a local level, this is the magic. These voters and community members actually start to move in a more value-driven and aligned mindset when they vote all the way up the ballot and when they organize at every level of government. What we find is that if people start having political conversations and socializing around the school board, the way that they have those conversations and the way that they act politically at other levels of government becomes more community-centered and puts students and community before politics. That's the magic of this experience here. We also find that it reinvigorates, re-energizes, and refocuses the rest of our community. We have spoken to tons of community members who heartbreakingly and horrifically have fought the exact same fights that we're fighting today a decade or two ago. And they're pissed and they're done. And that's fair. You have already won a lot of the rights that we're trying to win back, and not wanting to do it all over again and not believing that that's worth it makes sense. And so oftentimes with a lot of the older organizers that I respect, they share that they're tapped out, they're burnt out, they're done until our students come in, until our students start swinging. When you see our student organizers, age 12 to 22, show up to these school board meetings and start to speak truth to power and start to generate understanding and start to build empathy and share their stories, we see the instinct from all of our community members to jump behind them, stand behind them, support them, platform their voices, and make sure that they're heard. That energy from our young people sustains the experience from our older folks, and it reinforms and reinvigorates the movement. That is what brings out the best and brings us together. And that's why the second biggest principle is community unity. The third is that they launch lifelong civic participation. We need to make a case for Florida, folks. Over the last decade, organizational investment to the state of Florida, nonprofit investment, foundation investment, anything when it comes to community organization, voter registration, has been cut dramatically because there's not a case for how Florida is a state where new voters and new future can be created. We can make that case with school board organizing because what the data shows us is that if you get a young person to start getting involved in school board organizing while they're a high schooler, they become more likely to vote not only in school board elections, but in every election for the rest of their lives. When we're having conversations about how do we get young people to care, we can't start with a thing that they don't care about. Start with the thing they do care about. Connect it to the idea of an election, and it works almost every time. When you get our young people involved in a local issue-specific manner, we find that they become hungry for the opportunities to make a difference. Voting makes sense when you frame it accordingly, and they choose to do that. And because we all know voting is a sticky civic habit, if we get them to do it for their very first available election, after having school board experience as a high schooler, they become likely to vote in every election for the rest of their lives. That is the magic of this investment as well. We're not just speaking with 14 and 15-year-olds because they're the future. We are having conversations that develop the way that they process and engage in politics for the rest of their lives. One statistic I'll share that I think is really important: 81% of young people who felt their voice mattered in high school say that they are extremely likely to vote. If we think about the fact that our youth population is the most disenfranchised, AKA, we have the young people who least believe that their voice matters, this is an urgent problem for us to solve and an important opportunity for us to take hold of. The third reason why school board organizing is so important is that it develops lifelong voters. The fourth is that they spark turnout in every other election. It's the midterm year. You can imagine how many protests, town halls, events, fundraisers, luncheons I've shown up to speaking about the school board election, and someone has thrown up their hands and said, "What about the governor's race? Why aren't you focused on the governor's race?" I have some heartbreaking information. David Jolly is not motivating or exciting to our young voters. It doesn't mean they won't vote for him, but it does mean the vast majority of folks aged 14 to 30 are not excited about or interested in attending a David Jolly fundraiser, let alone canvass, let alone campaign. So what we don't have is an energized path forward to win the governor's race by talking about the governor's race. What we might have are tons of young people encouraged by their local politic that feels winnable, that feels personal, where it feels like, and they are leading, which can cause them to turn out all the way up the ballot. What do I mean? We're finding that when we speak about the presidential and the gubernatorial, and it feels like those races are already decided, our young people are like, why would I take the time to go get a ballot and fill out an election that is already decided? I don't need to do that. I don't need to waste the time. I'm not doing it. But, if you convince them to go get the ballot for an election they do believe is winnable, where they do believe they can make a difference, what we're seeing is that they don't look at the governor, look at all of the state house and senate and go, nah, I'm going to skip it. Go to the bottom of the ballot, bubble in school board and submit. No, once they get the ballot, they vote all the way down. So our mission is, how do we put this ballot in front of our young people? How do we get them to want to vote? Not the question of how do we inform them on every level of office? Not how do we make them care about the governor's race and forget everything else? How do we get them to want the ballot at all? Because once they see it, they see the opportunity, they want to maximize it, they're not going to skip everything else. They want to vote all the way down. Sometimes this means that some of our younger voters are holding up the polling booth. I've watched a couple of them Google it live action, right? And we're working to release voter guides to make that better. But what that means beautifully is that if we can focus on one specific medium of government where our young people believe and understand that they have power, then they'll turn out and vote at every level of government. And because of what I talked about on the first slide and the second, because it socializes and develops a better, more value-driven basics of politics, our young voters are more educated when they vote all the way up the ballot too. So instead of us sitting on this call trying to figure out how we're going to make a ton of young people excited about David Jolly, who they know used to be a Republican, we're going to get them excited and focused on the elections that are close to them that feel winnable, and they're going to vote for who they understand to be the better candidate come election time. And that also develops a true nonpartisan angle where people trust us more. If we had candidates' names on all of our material and we were telling them that they had to vote a certain way, they're going to roll their eyes and move on, because we are all done with the political divisiveness and we are all done with feeling like we're being campaigned at. When we give them community-centered education, we tell them all of the places we're getting our information from, and we just give them access. And we say, let us know if you want support. We just want you to be in control of your life. We find that voters trust us. They ask us questions. They want to get involved with us, and they make more informed choices. So the fourth reason that school board strategy is so wonderful is that they spark turnout in every other election. We're tunnel visioned, but it pays off across the network. The fifth and final is the most obvious. Our public education is in crisis. It needs our attention. Our public education is being undermined across the country by our president, by our legislature, by billionaires, and the exact plan to dismantle it entirely and replace it with a private option has been written down in Project 2025. This isn't an abstract, I wonder if they don't like public education. They have stated that they are attempting to destroy public education in the United States of America. We have to respond, because we all know why public education matters. We all know why having a universal opportunity to become educated and prepared for society is the only way to begin to heal generational wounds, provide generational opportunity, and truly embrace the concept of the American dream. But beyond all the things we know, there's one statistic that stands out far and beyond the rest. There is not one democracy in the entirety of global history that has lost public education and remained a democracy. Every single country, every single state, every single organized society of people that has ever let public education crumble has become an authoritarian regime shortly after. There is not a democracy on the planet that doesn't have public education, and there is not a society that has lost public education and not lost democracy. So we need to understand that not having the ability to inform, educate, and prepare our people to engage in civil life is the exact recipe that would allow this population to be overcome by fascism and pulled out of civic life. So that is the greater crisis that we are facing. We're not just protecting the strength of our neighborhoods. We're not just protecting the opportunity of our economy. We're not just building a society where people know how to speak to one another and read a book. We're protecting the entirety of the United States of America and its future as a democracy. That is why we have to think both short-term protection and long-term power, because we need to build in a way that allows us to sustainably protect public education and ensure that we are not constantly reacting to a new threat every month from a bad governor or a bad legislature. At the same time, right now, our immigrants to communities are under direct attack, and we can't just say, well, we're waiting for the election. We've got to build towards that. We hold the balance such that we're able to keep people safe, keep people informed, and keep them moving with us towards the greater goals. So the fifth and final, and the most obvious reason why the school board strategy is so essential, is that they're the front lines of the crisis. And it's where we can have the most impact to fight back together. I leave this here for all of my presentations because I would love to have people join us, but I know that Martha can distribute this link to you later. So I would like to come back together and see if there are any questions, anything that stood out, or anything that you want to talk about, because I know that I have just monologued for a good 45 minutes, hopefully. Yeah, 44, almost exactly.
Well, I'm just sitting here marveling at your eloquence. You have put into words certainly things that have been in my mind and on my heart for a long time, and I really appreciate that. When you and I saw each other a couple of weeks ago, we had a little bit of a short conversation about the Phoenix Doctrine.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm wondering, I know our group has been studying it, kind of breaking it down, trying to have a response to it. I'm wondering where that is in your radar.
That's a good question. So we're thinking about the Phoenix Declaration as more of an organizing tool than a real organizing challenge at the present moment. That's because, as we know, it's a big virtue signal document. It doesn't technically or structurally change policy. It more communicates to all of our lawmakers and to our school board members an expectation of the politics that our governor and state board wants to see. So we think about that as a culture war flame, as a virtue signal. And because it's a really ugly, unproductive document, we like to boil down the most unproductive pieces of it and communicate it to voters as the priorities of our governor, because they're clearly misaligned from the real priorities. So that's how we're thinking about that declaration. We're monitoring the language of it very closely, because what we're seeing is that that language is being used as the compass to kind of test local resolutions for school boards. The two most important words for us to look out for are transparency and accountability. We're seeing that those two words are obviously deeply resonant with far right voting bases, but they're actually equally, like exactly equally resonant with left voting bases. And so within that, there's opportunity for us. We think that connects to things like the Epstein files, right? That triggers both the words accountability and transparency. And we think about that in how we can start to speak to what our state board is actually doing. So right now, the Phoenix Declaration is a problem, but it's not an urgent threat as we see it. What we're looking at right now is more the attack on the FEA and how we can support our partners there. In chat, I see what can League of Women Voters do for C. I think that you guys are doing such good work, and we should bring our work together when possible. We'll be doing probably candidate conversations in town halls, and we have always done candidate conversations in Sarasota with the league because you do those perfectly. And so we'd be here to partner and think about doing that with y'all, maybe bringing together some postcarding events where we send out mailers and our students work with y'all's volunteers, and it's a shared experience. I would be happy to have a call specific to thinking about collaborations, but there are so many ways that I could offer immediately. I would like to think about y'all's priority for the year and see how we can work in tandem, because I have to imagine they're very aligned. And the work that we do in each community with the league often depends on where y'all are at, because we're here to be synergetic partners. We don't just need to take.
And can you identify for us the seat organization in Manatee County? Is there
Yes.
a point person or a particular
Yes.
group?
So you have some really fantastic student organizers in Manatee, and fortunately, your point person is here on call with you. It is Martha. Martha, since last fall, has actually been our communications coordinator for Manatee, and is just such a fantastic. You know, Martha, she's fantastic. So
she loving Martha. Yes,
she provides so much stability and direction for our Manatee team, and you can imagine why if you've been on even one call with her.
Well, and some of them have also been on Zooms and have met Jack.
Great. Yes, Jack is a really talented high school
Jack
organizer.
Lawrence, who's just
And because it's spring break, we're actually getting a huge influx of students that are finding us for the first time and are going to be joining us for our summer program. And so that's definitely a greater opportunity for us to look towards. All summer long, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, we're going to be working with a team of about 30 to 60 fellows, both in June and July, to do an intensive electoral program here in the Tampa Bay area for Sarasota, Manatee, and Hillsborough, because those elections are in August. And we have a tremendous advantage when in June and July, all of our very best canvassers are out of school.
Do you work identifying candidates to run at all?
Good question. So C Alliance does not work to identify candidates. There is a C4 partner of C Alliance, the Social Equity and Education Alliance, that does more candidate-specific work that in another space could be spoken to for compliance purposes. But the C Alliance that I am here to represent does not. We educate on all candidates. So for an example for work we would do is in the race that happened between Karen Rose and Liz Barker, we let folks know that 83% of current teachers didn't feel like they could bring a concern to Karen Rose without fear of being fired. And we saw that about 80% of teachers believe that Liz Barker had their best priorities in mind. Those are some powerful nonpartisan statements, but I don't think it leaves a tremendous amount of confusion about where teachers would have that vote go. So we do our best to just give everyone the information clearly and plainly, and they make the choice from there. Other C4 and PAC work has been done, but not in coordination, and it's separate. Yeah, Lyle.
Hi, Zander. It seems to me that a lot of young people are also influenced by what their neighbors are doing. So is there any sort of data that might be available so people could see what was done, for instance, in Hillsborough, or what was done in Charlotte or wherever?
100%. So we have all of our young people in a big digital community called our Slack, and you're all welcome to be part of it as well. Martha can show you the process. But we have a website where we basically tell everyone to go and plug in. And in doing so, we actually bring some of our high schoolers together on calls every week where they get to chat with students in other districts and in other states. And so it builds camaraderie, especially for our students that are starting out with just one or two peers or almost alone. And that definitely builds a strong community that holds them through the more difficult moments of the work. And we use our Sarasota case study and even case studies like in Brevard to represent how quickly we can grow and how structurally we can actually make an impact. And I think that ends up being really exciting for our young people too. So one win that I think is important is that we work really quickly within about a month to make sure that there's a press or social media hit for all of our young people. So there's evidence, not from us, not from them, not from people who love them like their parents, but from a community source that their work is seen and is making a difference.
That would be a great resource, I think, for everyone to have.
Yeah, I would love to have y'all there. We every single week, we have 3 movement-wide calls and then an open workshop. So every Monday from 6:30 to 7:30, we do a shared movement-wide workshop. It's not always just like an explicit training because we're a community that knows what we're doing. So this Monday, it was a refresher on text banking. And then we actually did a big shared text banking together. Every Wednesday from 6:30 to 8, we do Zoom with Zander. This is a chance to ask questions, share updates, but the first hour of it is a big current event brief of the entire week where we give you resources and action items that don't cost money and you can do from home so we can all process the political headlines together and then take action. And then Thursday, we do a shared strategy session so we can all talk about the respective problems in our communities and come together. And that ends up being a lot of fun because exactly to the point you mentioned, every once in a while, I'll have a student from maybe Orange County who's like, wait, I'm dealing with this. Has anyone ever dealt with this? And a student from Sarasota is like, they did that to us 4 years ago. I've got you. And it's allowed us to find a lot of really interesting things. For example, the school board chair in Brevard, Jean Trent, is pushing forward a resolution that is word for word copied and pasted from a Bridget Ziegler resolution here. And those things allow us to get organizing responses put together more quickly.
I see a hand up from the person who's got the League of Women Voter.
Love it. League.
I do apologize. I couldn't figure out how, I'm on very limited Wi-Fi and couldn't figure out on my phone how to change it. This is Ruth Herenshaw. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters here in Manatee County.
Amazing.
Yes, your presentation was truly inspiring. Your personality is truly inspiring. The results that you've gotten is truly inspiring. So we very much do want to work with you, and it's delightful that we already have Martha working with you. So we're just going to go leverage that to the maximum and get other people involved. I'll be working with her and certainly with your organization. I've been the principal lead with some of our other community partners, such as Recess Education, NAACP, Bridging the Gap, and the African American AME churches in Manatee County. And we're all in agreement that voting is the key to restoring civil rights. And there's going to be a lot of emphasis across all of them. So I'll be keeping everyone now more involved as this has begun to take shape. But one of our biggest events is going to be at Juneteenth on Saturday, June 20th. So I'll be sharing more information about that, because we certainly would like to have be a part of that. And all those community organizations that I talked about are going to be involved in developing that program. So I just wanted to echo what Mary Lynn had said. Very, very inspiring. But we really want to leverage the youth. And you've got the magic, so let's make the magic happen for all of us that really want to change the landscape here.
I love it. I'm excited. I just made a note about Juneteenth, and I know I'll hear more about that from Martha. You can count us in, and I'm excited because we're starting to, we actually just had this conversation a day ago, but we're setting the structure for what it'll look like week to week in terms of socials, communications, canvassing, and program for the Manatee School Board program. So I'll make sure that that's well communicated and we have opportunities to stay in step.
Thank you.
Susan has
Thank you.
Unmute, please, Susan.
Hi, everybody. First of all, my apologies for being late to your presentation. What I did here is quite fascinating, and I wish you lots of success. Do have a question about the new law in Florida for voter ID, and how that impacts your work, or what your group is planning to do to help young people be better prepared, since student IDs will no longer be allowed.
So a big part of what we're doing is making sure that people are aware of the change and are communicated about in terms of their additional options. We have a really successful texting program. We actually have higher response rates than most campaign texts because we'll do funny GIFs or images that stick out to our younger voters. And they're like, what is this? And then we actually trick them into being educated. We're also doing a lot on socials, and we have some really fantastic creator and influencer partners. What is going to be most important is actually having people that are stationed in terms of voting locations with big signage, see tents, see booths, mailers, and material that feels recognizable and approachable, informing about these changes. Because what you've named is part of the reason why we have such a disenfranchised youth voter population. Every single year for the last 4 years, there has been a piece of legislation from Florida's legislature that makes it harder for Floridian voters to vote. And it is painful to witness, and it is important to watch. And part of what we actually do is communicate which lawmakers made it hard to vote in the districts where we need them to vote, and say, this is why you need to be careful, and vote them out. So it's a chicken egg scenario, but the main thing to do is communicate, 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 communicate. We find that the message just doesn't reach people. And I've been overthinking that problem. I've been trying to find the avenues, but in reality, voters just weren't reached. Like in 2024, there were hundreds of thousands of young voters who did not hear from any campaign or organization because they're not marked as priority on the voter file. If you haven't voted before, right? If you're not a high likelihood voter, if you're someone who has no record, you're not hearing from most organizations or campaigns. And Susan, these are the exact people that are getting tripped up by these things because they're not a part of a political home like League of Women Voters. They're not hearing from campaigns. So we actually make a point to make sure that in this cycle, every single young voter is going to hear from C Alliance. So if you're 18 to 30, you will get a text, call, door knock, or piece of mail from us in the 2026 cycle. And so we work to try to make sure that the people that typically would be left behind aren't.
Thank you.
One last thought or question I had when Palmetto High School students walked out to stop ICE, and the governor had made sure there was a letter to each of the superintendents that they wanted to basically punish the kids to the nth degree.
Yeah.
I never did hear what the punishment was for those Palmetto High students. And I'm just wondering, was he involved in organizing them to walk out? Do you
Important question. Because we organized the largest walkout in our state's history, and a lot of these students are the same students or the younger siblings of or peers of those same students, we definitely have a culture and resonance with our young people. The way that we describe it is we are never telling our high school students to organize, right? The political climate is challenging. Everyone has different family dynamics and priorities. If a young person wants to organize a walkout, we are always here to support in terms of making sure they understand their rights, their information, the safety protocols. And so we have been involved in informing and supporting students at dozens and dozens of walkouts across the state, including what you've named there. And it's been a really incredible part of our year because these students are very naturally and excitingly moving from walkout organizing to school board organizing and to voter registration work. They're asking very quickly, wait, isn't what my superintendent said in direct violation of the United States Constitution? And we're able to back them up very quickly and say, yes, it is. Here's the talking point guide. Here's the date of the meeting. Here's what you should do. And our students are so on it right now, and the instinct is so strong. We're also really proud to report that in the majority of threatened punishment cases, punishment has been avoided entirely. We can't ensure that every single student follows the rules. Some leave campus when we urge not to. Some students make lots of noise and throw things when we urge not to. And of course, when you're organizing at scale, a level of chaos and disruption is part of the program and is never something that we're going to expect to disappear. And again, that's why we don't organize or assume responsibility for those students, but we're always here to give them the support and information. And we find that when the students that are leading the work engage with that information, we are able to keep them in safe ways. For example, we got off the phone a week and a half ago with some Broward County students that we were supporting. They were called into their principal's office, told that they would be expelled and stripped of all student leadership positions because they posted on social media about the walkouts. We asked them to send that in writing. They obviously said no, they would not do that in writing. Our students moved forward entirely. They moved forward following the rules, and they received no punishment at all. In Brevard, I know we have someone here in Brevard. The superintendent on local news stations said that students did not have the right to protest on campus, and folks who did would be punished severely. Obviously, it is an American right that you do have the right to protest on campus, and you have free speech rights. And so students in Brevard continued to walk out. Those same students were threatened and even called into the office. None of them were suspended. None of them received a referral. None of them got detention, and none of them were expelled because they're well within their rights and they're following our rules. Obviously, this creates lots of tension in those communities. So 2 weeks later, Brevard then passed new policies to make it harder for those students to organize. But of course, we're still there to support those students. So you can expect in a couple of weeks to start seeing students with armbands pop up across the state, referencing obviously the Tinker v. Des Moines decision in a very clean parallel that makes it very hard to punish. We want our school boards to directly have to defy the Supreme Court case explicitly in the public eye if they want to punish these students. And so that's going to be the next wave of organizing that happens there. And just to clarify for folks, because there's not an understanding, you can punish students for missing class, right? Like if you leave class and you're supposed to be in class, you should be punished. That's what happens. But what cannot be punished is the political speech attached to it, right? And so that's what the governor, the State Board of Education, and many of our school board members are attempting to misconstrue. And that's a really important piece of clarity, right? You can receive a detention. You really typically can't receive a suspension, but you can receive a detention if you walk out of class and you're not supposed to be there. The majority of our young people decide that that is well worth it. What you can't be punished for is saying something that the state disagrees with while you're absent from class.
Okay, Martha, back to you to close us out.
I was just going to say, I sat in on a number of pretty much all of the Zooms that were centered around, students seeking advice on the walkouts. And I can tell you that Zander did not say, throw out the chairs, jump on the tables, in fact, he very clearly defined, what was a disruption, what wasn't, what they could do and be punished for. It was very, very well structured. And, the students would ask questions. Well, what if I helped to organize a walkout, but one of the other students starts doing something, with more violence, and can I be punished for that? Well, no, the student organizing cannot, but the student causing the damage certainly could. So, like I said, all of these things that he's on it. There's not a Zoom that I have attended that I haven't learned something new.
Fantastic. Well, I know you and I and the others on our education issues team and the league at large will have more conversations about taking action and really following up with Zander to be more connected in very, very strategic and important, impactful ways.
Well, I look forward to it.
Yeah, and I think, the combination and the synergy, would be just wonderful, and we can really make a difference in the midterms.
Yeah, and I really hope at some point Xander can find about what Terry is doing in the high schools that she goes to as Lady Liberty, and actually has the students vote on issues to show them that their voices would have made a difference in the last election. So
Ooh,
lot we
I do
can,
want to hear more about that.
lot we can share.
All right. Thank you all very much. This has been really fantastic. I will follow up. I'm excited to get to work more closely with y'all. And it seems like we're already naturally on the same page. So I'm excited to turn it together.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks so much, Zander.
I'll see you soon, Martha.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.